posing as the Martian aggressors, the conspiracy deploys what Drummond refers to as a protonic bomb, a weapon several times more devastating than the nuclear bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world is horrified by the results. The once great forest all but disappears, and all that remains is a desolate landscape with very few structures left standing. An anxious and stressed United Nations rallies around the conspiracy, completely oblivious to the fact that this collection of former intelligence operatives and scientists are responsible for the rockets and the protonic bomb. I think that initially, okay, there will be some kind of false flag event, and there will be casualties, and people will lose their lives. And initially, it will be blamed on another country, um,
Okay.
Russia, China. When those narratives prove to be deficient and fail to answer, that's when they'll turn to something beyond the Earth. My name is Paul Collins. I've been a researcher for quite a long time now. I worked with the nationally syndicated radio talk show host Michael Corbin for a long time on his show, A Closer Look. We also did, my brother and I also co-authored several articles that appeared at Conspiracy Archive. We're currently writing for Brett and Thomas of PsyOps Cinema fame, their Decoding Culture Foundation, and we have articles appearing at the Canadian Patriot Review as well. And one of the things that we've taken up as of late is the question of UFOs, but we're taking it from a really different and what we think is fresh, novel, but also accurate perspective concerning UFOs. Something a little bit more down to earth as far as the explanation. No less sinister though. Oh, no less nefarious. But yeah, I guess that the best way to start this lecture off is at the beginning, and the beginning is uh is Paul Nitze and NSC 68. So if everybody's ready, I'll just go ahead and jump headlong in if you're all prepared and everything. So okay, all right. Well, many UFO investigators may consider Nitze and his national security brainchild, the National Security Council memo in NSC 68, to be a digression, a drastic deviation from the topic of those strange things that periodically appear in the skies, igniting curiosity and while also inciting fear. For myself and my co-author, my brother Philip, Nitze and NSC 68 are absolutely key to apprehending the secret at the center of the UFO question. In 1950, America would begin its migration away from its anti-statist and anti-militarist tradition that was established by the founding fathers, as Truman's administration decided to reassess the way it approached the issue of national security. That reassessment led to the creation of the group that would author NSC 68, known as the State Defense Policy Review Group. This collection of government officials was brought together in early 1950 under the leadership of Paul Nitze, the director of the State Department's policy planning staff. By all accounts, Nitze was a hardliner's hardliner, an exemplar of the nation's war hawks. In an obituary for Nitze that appeared in the British Guardian newspaper, one reads, quote, Nitze was a Democrat, but for much of the Cold War, his hawkish views were more in line with mainstream Republican thinking. He plotted U.S. nuclear policy throughout the era of mutually assured destruction, unquote. While many admired Nitze for the way he navigated the United States through the Cold War, he was not without critics who, quote, saw his assessments as biased towards the worst case scenarios, unquote. Nitze's dire judgments and Cold War fever dreams would be instrumental in setting the tone of NSC 68. The tone was a dramatic one. One writer of foreign policy affairs, Jim Lindsay, observes, quote, the report came packed with with more rhetorical ammunition than most other government memos, unquote. The authors of NSC 68 began firing that rhetorical ammunition in the document's introduction, painting a picture of a colossal life and death struggle between America and a Soviet menace that, quote, unlike previous aspirants to hegemony, is animated by a new fanatic faith, antithetical to our own, and seeks to impose its absolute authority over the rest of the world, unquote. The struggle is characterized by a precarious balancing act between the desire to secure peace and the need to defend against a relentless enemy whose appetite will only be satisfied by world domination. The document states, quote, on the one hand, the people of the world yearn for relief from the anxiety arising from the risk of atomic war. On the other hand, any substantial further extension of the area under the domination of the Kremlin would raise the possibility that no coalition adequate to confront the Kremlin with greater strength could be assembled. It is in this context that this republic and its citizens, in the ascendancy of their strength, stand in their deepest peril, unquote. The introduction concludes with the assertion that the problems arising out of the competition between East and West would have worldwide implications and must be met with a quick and decisive response. The authors write, quote, the issues that face us are momentous, involving the fulfillment or destruction not only of this republic, but of civilization itself. They are issues which will not await our deliberations. With conscience and resolution, this government and the people it represents must now take new and fateful decisions, unquote. NSC 68 sees the fight between the free world and the communist world through the interpretive lens of Manichaean dualism. As Lindsay put it, quote, the Soviet Union and its satellites stood diametrically opposed to everything the United States and by extension the rest of the free world stood for, unquote. The two sides share absolutely nothing in common, leaving no room for reasonable accommodations, mutually beneficial arrangements, or peace agreements or discourse. The document asserts, quote, the implacable purpose of the slave state to eliminate the challenge of freedom has placed the two great powers at opposite poles. It is this fact which gives the present polarization of power the quality of crisis, unquote. The authors drive home their dualistic view by presenting radically different portraits of the two competitors. According to NSC 68, America is the very embodiment of virtue, a nation, quote, whose fundamental purpose is to assure the integrity and vitality of our free society, which is founded upon the dignity and worth of the individual, unquote. The United States, in the view of the NSC 68 authors, possesses a, quote, determination to maintain the essential elements of individual freedom, unquote, and a, quote, determination to create conditions under which our free and democratic system can live and prosper, unquote. America has a, quote, determination to fight if necessary to defend our way of life, unquote, meaning, of course, that the American public is obligated to go to war whenever they are called upon to do so. So every hero needs a villain, and every story needs both a protagonist and an antagonist, a fact that Nietzsche and his cohorts were well aware of. NSC 68 makes it clear who the villain is: the Soviet Union. NSC 68 provides the following description of the Cold War's antagonist. Quote, the fundamental design of those who control the Soviet Union and the international communist movement is to retain and solidify their absolute power, first in the Soviet Union, and second in the areas now under their control. In the minds of the Soviet leaders, however, achievement of this design requires the dynamic extension of their authority and the ultimate elimination of any effective opposition to their authority. The design, therefore, calls for the complete subversion or forcible destruction of the machinery of government and structure of society in the countries of the non-Soviet world, and their replacement by an apparatus and structures subservient to and controlled from the Kremlin. To that end, Soviet efforts are now directed toward the domination of the Eurasian landmass, the United States, as the principal center of power in the non Soviet world and the bulwark of the opposition to Soviet expansion, is the principal enemy whose integrity and vitality must be subverted and destroyed by one means or another if the Kremlin is to achieve its fundamental design, unquote. While the Soviet Union was certainly no collection of saints, the picture of America's Cold War foe is far too simplistic. Further, no considerations are given to the fact that America had its share of nefarious elites with less than pure motives. NSC 68 rails against, quote, the grim oligarchy of the Kremlin, unquote, while conveniently ignoring the fact that America had its own semi-submerged oligarchy and still does. Nitze and company made sure to bleach out all the nuances of the situation, resulting in a very crude and inaccurate understanding of the Cold War world. In view of Nitze and the other participants in the State Department, the State Defense Policy Review Group, the way to vanquish the Soviet beast was to modify George Kennan's containment policy with a call to arms. Lindsay observes that, quote, NSC 68 called for more aggressive efforts to counter Soviet expansion, efforts that would be backed up by a massive increase in both conventional and nuclear armaments, unquote. NSC 68's marriage of containment and militarism is captured in the following statement. Quote, in the concept of containment, the maintenance of a strong military posture is deemed to be essential for two reasons. One, as an ultimate guarantee of our national security, and two, as an indispensable backdrop to the conduct of the policy of containment. Without superior aggregate military strength in being and readily mobilizable, a policy of containment, which is in effect a policy of calculated and gradual coercion, is no more than a policy of bluff, unquote. Nitze and the other architects of NSC 68 made a case for militarizing containment by asserting, quote, that the U.S. military capabilities are strategically more defensive in nature than offensive and are more potential than actual, unquote. According to the NSC 68, this poses a problem for the United States and the free world because, quote, there is now and will be in the future no absolute defense. The history of war also indicates that a favorable decision can only be achieved through offensive action, unquote. For Nitze and the other hawks behind NSC 68, any defensive strategy lacking a significant offensive component could not secure a victory in the Cold War. The document states, quote, even a defensive strategy, if it is to be successful, calls not only for defensive forces to hold vital positions while mobilizing and preparing for the offensive, but also for offensive forces to attack the enemy and keep him off balance, unquote. Essentially, Nitze and the State Defense Policy Review Group were using the old adage of the best defense is an offense as the pretext to erect a garrison state. The review group wanted the garrison state built while America still had a nuclear advantage over the Soviets. NS-68 elaborates, quote, the threat to the free world involved in the development of the Soviet Union's atomic and other capabilities will rise steadily and more rapidly. For the time being, the United States possesses a marked atomic superiority over the Soviet Union, which, together with the potential capabilities of the United States and other free countries in other forces and weapons, inhibits aggressive Soviet action. This provides an opportunity for the United States, in cooperation with other free countries, to launch a buildup of strength which will support a firm policy directed to the frustration of the Kremlin design. The immediate goal of our efforts to build a successfully functioning political and economic system in the free world backed by adequate military strength is to postpone and avert the disastrous situation which, in light of the Soviet Union's probable fission bomb capability and possible thermonuclear bomb capability, might arise in 1954 on a continuation of our present programs. By acting promptly and vigorously in such a way at this date is, so to speak, pushed into the future. We could we could permit time for the process of accommodation, withdrawal, and frustration to produce the necessary changes in the Soviet system. Time is short, however, and the risk of war attended upon a decision to build up strength will steadily increase the longer we defer it. Unquote. Nitze and the other members of the review group failed to mention the fact that garrison states, like the one they were promoting, are characterized by a national economy that is nearly swallowed whole by obscene defense spending. The authors of NSC 68 pointed out that their proposed rapid buildup in strength, quote, will be costly, unquote, but failed to provide an estimate concerning the final cost. Concerns regarding regarding the expense slowed the approval of NSC 68. The obstacles frustrating the implementation of NSC 68 were removed with Korea's invasion of South Korea, with North Korea's invasion of South Korea. Again, the hidden hand of covert political forces could be detected there. The weaponization of the Lend-Lease Act came into play once more, with political circles in the West indirectly empowering North Korea through industrial transfers to the Soviet Union. The military clash between East and West seemed to benefit predatory capitalists that, according to conventional thinking, had everything to lose if the communists won the day. The standard understanding of the relational dynamic that existed between cartel capitalists and the communists prevented the public from discerning mutually beneficial arrangements held by the two. There were, however, other clandestine forces inhabiting the Cold War milieu that profited from the Korean conflict. Nitze and the authors of the NSC 68 were among them. The Korean War appeared to vindicate Nitze and the State Defense Policy Review Group. The forecast found in NSC 68 assumed the characteristics of eschatological prophecies. Lindsay writes, quote, the debate over NSC 68 might have sputtered out and the memo might have become nothing more than a historical footnote, if not for North Korea's invasion of South Korea on June 25th, 1950. The attack by Moscow's allies seemed to confirm what NSC 68 had argued. The Soviet slave state was on the march, and only American military might stop it. Truman's nearly immediate decision to order U.S. troops to come to South Korea's aid guaranteed a major jump in U.S. defense spending. Truman had proposed a $13 billion defense budget for fiscal year 1951. It ended up ballooning to $58 billion. With cost no longer an obstacle, NSC 68 became official policy. As Secretary of State Dean Atkinson later observed, quote, Korea saved us, unquote. NSC 68 would not be declassified until 1975. By the time the document had found its way into the public sphere, the American military had seen 25 years of unprecedented growth and expansion. The Truman administration alone tripled its defense spending between the period of 1951 to 1953. Truman's tremendous boost in the defense budget was largely attributable to a foreign policy interest group, known to be a repository for several deep state actors. It was called the Committee on the Present Danger. Founded in 1950 under the leadership of Harvard President James Conant, former Undersecretary of the Army Tracy Voorhees, and atomic scientist Vannevar Bush, the Committee on the Present Danger, or CPD, sought to promote the containment militarism formula found in NSC 68 under the pretext of combating, quote, the aggressive designs of the Soviet Union, unquote. In its crusade to militarize the containment doctrine, the CPD's weapon of choice was the media. According to Thierry Meeson, quote, the Committee on the Present Danger, CPD, launched a media campaign in favor of urgent reinforcement of the national defense, unquote. The CPD's media blitz was extremely successful. Misan writes, quote, the committee had such an impact that a national consensus allowed Truman to dramatically triple the military budget and make public the containment policy, which is the creation of a cordon sanitaire to contain the USSR, unquote. The latter years of the Cold War saw the principle of diminishing returns kicking in as the Soviet and Chinese menace began to lose its shock effect in the West generally and in the United States in particular. With communism in decline, corrective action was about to take place in America's democratic experiment, with a return of the anti statist and anti militarist tradition celebrated by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and a whole slew of the other founding fathers. Adherence to Nietzsche's pro status, pro militarist national security philosophy saw this as a negative development and endeavored to create other threat narratives that would sustain the militarization and statist trend that had been acting as a hindrance to the American experiment in democracy for several decades. Now, this is where the UFOs come in. Some of those disciples of Nietzsche's Cold War philosophy saw the idea of a menace from outside our planet, an extraterrestrial invasion, if you will, as a viable threat narrative and began promoting the concept. The Hungarian theoretical physicist and father of the H bomb, Edward Teller, appears to have been among those followers of the NSC 68 principles who began to build up the alien threat narrative. Edward Teller was a member of the aforementioned Committee on the Present Danger, CPD, and a true believer when it came to Nietzsche's Cold War philosophy. In addition to this, there is compelling evidence that suggests that Teller was also a member of the Aviary, a collection of UFO disinformation agents who used individuals like the disgraced ufologist William Moore and the American businessman and UFO investigator Paul Benowitz as disinformation amplifiers, as conduits for disinformation. Using these two individuals and others, the Aviary was able to spread UFO lore that is still believed by people in the UFO community to this very day. The stories of alien underground bases, treaties between the United States government and aliens that permitted a certain number of abductions to occur, and military contests between Delta Force and alien hostiles originated with this group of disinformation agents. The story proved to be far too much for Benowitz's mental health, and he found himself in a psychiatric institution. He was an unwitting dupe in all of this. Moore and other perpetrators of the myth, such as the deceased John Lear, who was quite open about his work with the CIA, were not so innocent. We go into greater detail regarding this story in the third installment of our series, Deception Through Disclosure. So we would encourage everyone here to please read that article, which is up at Canadian Patriot Review. In the fourth installment of this ever-growing series, we take up the question of what can be expected next from the covert political circles involved in the UFO deception. We believe that in order to answer that question, one has to once again look at the machinations of Paul Nitze. The enigmatic Nitze, however, may also help one discern what is to come in the realm of UFO trickery. Sleuths and researchers hoping to predict the next phase of UFO manipulation would benefit richly from an examination of NITSE's role in an infamous, albeit aborted, false flag plan. NITSE's role in this nefarious false flag plan is found in a May 1963 proposal that the Cold War intellectual wrote and sent to the White House when he was Assistant Secretary of Defense. The proposal suggested, quote, a possible scenario whereby an attack on a United States reconnaissance aircraft could be exploited toward the end of effecting the removal of the Castro regime, unquote. Investigative journalist James Bamford summarizes NITSE's scheme. Quote, in the event Cuba attacked a U-2, the plan proposed sending in additional American pilots, this time on dangerous, unnecessary low-level reconnaissance missions with the expectation that they would be shot down, thus provoking a war. The U.S. could undertake various measures designed to stimulate the Cubans to provoke a new incident, said the plan. NITSE, however, did not volunteer to be one of the pilots, unquote. While the White House was not receptive to such acts of provocation, one of NITSE's ideas gained traction in Pentagon circles. That idea employed low-altitude flights meant to antagonize. Bamford elaborates, quote, one idea involved sending fighters across the island on harassing reconnaissance and show-off missions, flaunting our freedom of action, hoping to stir the Cuban military to action. Thus, said the plan, depending above all on whether the Cubans were or could be made to be trigger happy, the development of the initial downing of a reconnaissance plane could lead, at best, to the elimination of Castro, perhaps the removal of Soviet troops and the installation of ground inspection in Cuba, or at least to our demonstration of firmness on reconnaissance. About a month later, a low-level flight was made across Cuba, but unfortunately for the Pentagon, instead of bullets, it produced only protest, unquote. NITSE's insane proposals were part of a larger collection of morally reprehensible recommendations known as Operation Northwoods. This operation has been described as, quote, what may be the most corrupt plan ever created by the U.S. government, unquote. Conceived by the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Lyman L. Limnitzer and the other demented minds that comprised the JSC, Operation Northwoods, quote, called for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, for a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and elsewhere. People would be framed for bombings they did not commit. Planes would be hijacked. Using phony evidence, all of it would be blamed on Castro, thus giving Limnitzer and his cabal the excuse, as well as the public and international backing they needed to launch their war, unquote. Operation Northwoods was a response to President John F. Kennedy's attempt to ease tensions with Castro's Cuba. The president's intentions to reduce hostilities between America and Cuba were made known during a White House meeting on February 26, 1962. During that meeting, the president had his brother, Robert Kennedy, order General Edward Lansdale, a United States Air Force officer who specialized in counterinsurgency, quote, to drop all anti-Castro efforts, unquote. Robert directed Lansdale, quote, to concentrate for the next 3 months strictly on gathering intelligence about Cuba, unquote. This development indicated that to Limnitzer that the Kennedy brothers were stepping away from the hawkish position regarding Cuba. The JCS chairman decided it was time to concoct an extremely immoral version of the noble lie to prevent peace from breaking out. Limnitzer and his cohorts on the JCS determined that they, quote, would have to trick the American public and world opinion into hating Cuba so much that they would not only go along, but would insist that he and his generals launch their war against Castro, unquote. A secret JCS document obtained by James Bamford revealed the chief's intentions to transform Cuba into a boogeyman that would set off the overt war that they wanted. It stated, quote, world opinion and the United Nations Forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible and as alarming an alarming and unpredictable threat to the peace of the Western Hemisphere. Operation Northwoods was thus born. The Northwoods Plan, quote, called for a war in which many patriotic Americans and innocent Cubans would die senseless deaths, all to satisfy the egos of twisted generals back in Washington, safe in their taxpayer-financed homes and limousines, unquote. The plan advocated killing innocent people and then placing the blame for the loss of life on Castro, hoping to capitalize on the subsequent public outrage. Here is a sampling of suggested terrorist actions that were part of the Operation Northwoods proposal. Number one, destroying the Mercury Atlas 6, MA6, with astronaut John Glenn on board, the American to orbit the Earth, the first American to orbit the Earth, thus transforming the NASA mission into a national tragedy and sparking outrage against the falsely accused Cuban government of Fidel Castro. Two, a series of riots at Guantanamo Bay that would include arson, the firing of martyrs, sabotage, and other acts of mayhem, all carried out by friendly Cubans dressed as members of the Cuban military. Three, blowing up an American vessel in Guantanamo Bay and then claiming that the Cuban government was responsible for the act of sabotage. This action, of course, drew inspiration from the 1898 explosion on the battleship Maine, which was docked in Havana Harbor at the time. That explosion, believed by many to be a false flag intended to touch off the Spanish-American War, claimed the lives of 266 U.S. sailors. Four, fake hijackings of civil air and surface craft, all claimed to be instigated by the Cuban government. Five, shooting down a remote-controlled drone and then claiming that it was a plane filled with passengers who became the victims of an unprovoked attack carried out by the Cuban government. This list of prescriptions appearing in Operation Northwoods is much longer, but the list of prescriptions is much longer, but this sampling should give the audience here an idea of the extreme measures individuals such as Nitze and Lemnitzer were prepared to take. Lemnitzer submitted Operation Northwoods to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara for consideration. His final recommendation to McNamara was that Operation Northwoods and the subsequent invasion of Cuba be assigned, of course, to the JCS. On Tuesday, March 13th, 1962, Lemnitzer, quote, went to a special meeting in McNamara's office, unquote. Following this meeting with the Secretary of Defense, Lemnitzer, quote, met with the Kennedy's military representative, General Maxwell Taylor. The end result of these meetings was not the Kennedy administration's approval of Operation Northwoods. Bamford writes, quote, what happened during those meetings is unknown, but 3 days later, President Kennedy told Lemnitzer that there was virtually no possibility that the U.S. would ever use overt military force in Cuba, unquote. Now, McNamara was a man of many flaws and can hardly be described as a political dove who endeavored to avert war at all costs. That being said, he did effectively represent the Kennedy administration's non-interventionist stance on Cuba when dealing with Lemnitzer. McNamara's resistance to plans for a military invasion of Cuba seemed to only make Lemnitzer and the other chiefs more determined. The Lemnitzer and the other JCS members went around demanding to be given authority to invade Cuba. They pressed the issue too much with the president. They pressed the issue too much with the Secretary of State, and His repeated Limnitzer's repeated attempts to start a war in Cuba completely destroyed any legitimacy he had within the administration. According to Bamford, quote, McNamara had virtually no confidence in his military chief and was rejecting nearly every proposal the general sent to him, unquote. So that they lost the Secretary of the Defense, Secretary of State, the president, everybody in the administration. Perhaps the rejected proposals, with their extreme and dangerous ideas, caused McNamara to view Limnitzer as a mentally unbalanced individual who was no longer fit to head up the JCS. Whatever the case may be, Bamford writes, quote, within months, Limnitzer was denied a second term as JCS chairman and transferred to Europe as chief of NATO, which would lead to Operation Gladio, but that's a story for another day. While Operation Northwoods died in the womb, its spirit has lived on in a number of iterations. Numerous false flags that have taken place subsequent to Operation Northwoods reveal that the concepts authored by Nitze and other like-minded madmen have remained in vogue. Reviewing Operation Northwoods leads UFO deception researchers to ask an important question. Are there any plans for a false flag involving fake extraterrestrial hostiles that invade our airspace in advanced craft? In other words, is a cosmic Operation Northwoods in the works? The prediction of and recommendations for faux extraterrestrial hostilities may have been put to paper in 1948. They did not first appear in the esoteric scribblings of a secret society or in the policy papers of some obscure think tank. Instead, it seems to have initially appeared in the pages of fiction. The work of fiction in question was Bernard Newman's The Flying Saucer. According to author Mark Pilkington, the novel has, quote, the singular distinction of being the world's first UFO book, unquote. The book presents readers with a conspiratorial cabal of scientists and intelligence operatives from across the world that possess the all too familiar goal of ending war and establishing utopia. In order to realize their globalist dream of a united planet, the scientists in the cabal manufacture a threat from space. Newman's novel, according to Pilkington, quote, seems deliberately to merge fact and fiction, unquote. Newman may have become aware of the desires within elitist and intelligence circles to create an alien menace during his work with the British Ministry of Information, MOI, which, quote, was the central government department responsible for the publicity and propaganda in the Second World War, unquote. Located in the Senate House at the University of London during World War II, the MOI supposedly acted as the model for the Ministry of Truth, Oceania's propaganda ministry, in George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984. According to independent researcher Jackie Jarrah, Orwell's wife, Eileen, quote, worked at the Ministry of Information in the censorship department from 1939 to 1942, unquote. Jura asserts that the MOI prevented Orwell's book from being published during the war due to its strong anti-communist and strong anti-Stalinist message. At the time, the MOI was spreading pro-Soviet propaganda so that the British population would view Stalin as our benevolent ally. But Newman, according to author Robert Calder, joined the MOI as a staff lecturer following Britain's crushing defeat at Dunkirk in 1940. During his time with the ministry, Newman, quote, produced a number of books to promote the British cause, unquote, including The Story of Poland, which came out in 1940, Siegfried Spy in 1940 as well, Savoy, Corsica, Tunis in 1940, Death to the Fifth Column, 1941, One Man's View, 1941, Secret Weapon, 1942, and The New Europe in 1942. Newman traveled to the United States to spread pro-British propaganda as, quote, a director of the Ministry of Information asked him in the summer of 1942 to tour the United States to help dispel some of the American ignorance of the British, unquote. With the MOI paying for his travel expenses, Newman conducted an extensive tour of the United States. Calder provides details concerning Newman's visit to the United States. Quote, after consulting the British High Commissioner in Ottawa, Malcolm MacDonald, and being invited to speak across Canada, he, Newman, began his American visit in Washington. There he met with President Roosevelt and lectured at a forum for senators, members of Congress, senior officials, and civil servants on matters such as India, the Second Front, Churchill, censorship, sabotage, British communism, air power, and Europe after the war. As well, a radio program he did with Henry Bacage reached an audience estimated at 11 million and led to many more invitations to broadcast over more local networks throughout the country. From Washington, Newman traveled across the United States to Alabama, Kansas City, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Hollywood, San Francisco, and other points. In Chicago, he spoke to an audience of 4,000, and at one army camp there were 1,000 soldiers present and many more thousands listening around loudspeakers. Newman's stateside propaganda mission suggests that the writer, that Newman was at least marginally familiar with the techniques of semiotic manipulation pioneered by communication theoreticians. Such theoreticians would have populated the MOI. As a persuasive writer and a skilled propagandist, Newman may have appreciated the potential that an extraterrestrial threat narrative possesses for the purposes of propaganda and social engineering. Therefore, his book, The Flying Saucer, which reached the shores of America in 1950, may constitute a novelized recommendation for or prediction of the effective exploitation of humanity's fear of things otherworldly or unknown. It may even be a mixture of both, a blending, if you will, a blending of prophesied events and suggested courses of action. That possibility is probably the most likely, and if it is correct, then The Flying Saucer, the novel The Flying Saucer, is the cosmic Operations Northwoods hiding in literary garb. Now, we provide a very in-depth review of Newsom's Flying Saucer, The Flying Saucer, in the fourth installment of our Deception Through Disclosure series. Again, we cannot encourage people enough to go and read it. That being said, we need to provide a summary here. So here it goes. Inspired by a speech by Prime Minister Anthony Eden, a collection of scientists and former intelligence operatives hatch a conspiracy to fake an extraterrestrial invasion that will act as the pretext for the formation of a world government and the universal imposition of technocracy. The conspiracy is led by Drummond, a scientist, quote, whose science is a generation ahead, unquote, thus permitting him to create technologies so advanced that to the untrained eye, they appeared to be otherworldly in nature. Drummond and the other conspirators launch a series of rockets that crash in various parts of the world: England, Russia, America. Hieroglyphics on the rockets, conveniently deciphered by a scientist who is part of the cabal, reveal a message from space to humanity. According to the message, the inhabitants of Mars are threatened by extinction. The Martians are experiencing what is referred to as the quote unquote wasting disease. And the only cure can be derived from a metal regarded as precious and valuable by humans: gold. A demand is leveled by the fake Martians: relinquish the world's entire gold supply or face invasion. Drummond encourages the nations of the world to resist, which they do. The Earth's refusal brings the conspiracy's first major false flag, an attack on the Bialowieza forest in Poland. Posing as the Martian aggressors, the conspiracy deploys what Drummond refers to as a protonic bomb, a weapon several times more devastating than the nuclear bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world is horrified by the results. The once great forest all but disappears, and all that remains is a desolate landscape with very few structures left standing. An anxious and stressed United Nations rallies around the conspiracy, completely oblivious to the fact that this collection of former intelligence operatives and scientists are responsible for the rockets and the protonic bomb. Drummond promises a counterattack and calls for the nations of the world to jettison their nationalism and patriotism in favor of world unification, which is supposedly the only antidote to Martian hostilities. While Drummond constructs rockets for the big pushback, the conspiracy stages a crash of a Martian craft complete with the corpse of a Martian pilot. Scientists within the cabal prep a body made from several animal and human cadavers and design it to experience rapid decomposition so that scrutiny is avoided. The world now has a face and a name for the Phantom Menace and is even more eager for Drummond to deploy the rockets to Martian targets. Following the deployment, one more false flag occurs, the appearance of giant pylons floating in the skies in Central Africa around the Congo, which can disable cars and aircraft engines. All of this sufficiently traumatizes the Earth's population into accepting a world government which is starting to solidify in the book's final chapter. There is also hints in that final chapter that a new world religion is forming with an ecumenical meeting taking place between all the Christian sects in Jerusalem. Most importantly, the technocracy, referred to by Drummond as a League of Scientists, fully emerges. So the novel raises an important question. And again, please go and read the article because we share specifics from the novel in there that are quite telling. But it raises an important question. Can a real life equivalent of Newman's fictional conspiracy be identified in the world today? For some, uncovering such a secretive group of schemers is a daunting, if not impossible, task. Any person who dares try to runs the risk of becoming like Popeye Doyle, the determined detective in the 1971 neo-noir action thriller film The French Connection. At the end of that cinematic classic, Doyle is reduced to an obsessed fanatic who is attempting to catch a criminal mastermind who has evolved into little more than an elusive phantom, more ghost than man. That's that's certainly not a road anyone wants to go down. Fortunately, some of the machinations that resemble the conspiracy in Newman's literary work may have already been uncovered. A February 2024 report released by the Department of Defense's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or ARROW, may provide UFO sleuths with a good place to start. The report is to ufologists what garlic is to vampires. The garlic can be found in the report's executive summary, which begins with the following bold declarative statement, quote, Arrow found no evidence that any USG, that's United States government, investigation, academic sponsored research, or official review has confirmed that any sighting of a UAP represented extraterrestrial technology. All investigative efforts at all levels of classification concluded that most sightings were ordinary objects and phenomena and the result of misidentification. Although not the focus of this report, it is worthwhile to note that all official foreign UAP investigatory efforts to date have reached the same general conclusion as U.S. government investigation, unquote. The report also placed another sacred cow of the ufology community on the altar. The assertion that extraterrestrial technology has been reverse engineered, producing a whole plethora of modern day breakthroughs and conveniences. The report states, quote, Arrow found no empirical evidence for claims that the USG, United States government, and private companies have been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. Arrow determined, based on all information provided to date, that claims involving specific people, known locations, technological tests, and documents allegedly involved in or related to the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology are inaccurate, unquote. Some will inevitably argue that the Arrow report is just one more cover up. Such an assertion is not without some justification. After all, the government has participated in several proven, documented cover ups throughout the years. That being said, it is usually incumbent upon the claimant to provide evidence for his or her claim. The more recent crop of so-called UFO whistleblowers, those problematic individuals in the so-called age of disclosure, who have received unmerited praise from the media for non-existent heroism and bravery, have failed to provide even a shred of evidence. Given that fact, the term whistleblower may need to be tossed out the window in favor of a more applicable term, disinformation agent. So, in all likelihood, Arrow's 2024 report is nothing but honest, fair, and accurate in its assertions that there's no evidence of extraterrestrial UAPs and that there are no human plagiarists ripping off the best minds that Zeta Reticuli has to offer. Later in the report, Arrow begins homing in on the most viable candidate for the real life counterpart to Newman's fictional conspiracy. In a section entitled Accounts of USG Investigatory Programs Since 1945, Arrow provides background on an investigatory body that readers became acquainted with, or you will become acquainted with, in the second installment of this series, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, AWSAP, also known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. The report provides AWSAP's standard history, pointing out that the program was established in 2009 by the Defense Intelligence Agency in coordination with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, quote, to assess long-term, over-the-horizon foreign advanced aerospace threats to the United States, unquote. The report also points out that the program was managed by the DIA and involved a private sector organization that was contracted by the government. The report then shares a very interesting fact. The ATIP incarnation of the program, quote, was never an official DoD program, unquote. According to the Arrow report, quote, after OSAP was canceled, the ATIP moniker was used by some members associated with an informal, unofficial UAP community of interest within DoD that researched UAP sightings from military observers as part of their ancillary job duties, unquote. A group of individuals within the DoD who blur the lines between public and private interest is, needless to say, highly problematic. Who did this? Did the members of this quote unquote unofficial UAP community of interest within the DoD work for? Who exactly did they represent? The answers to those questions may bring one to a realm where Newman's fiction merges with reality. The Arrow report then makes a significant observation. Arrow researched and here's that observation, quote, Arrow researched and interviewed numerous people, programs, and leads. It has determined that modern allegations that the USG is hiding off-world technology and beings largely originate from the same group of individuals who have ties to the canceled ALSAP/ATIP program and private sector organizations in, in private sector organizations' paranormal research efforts. These individuals have worked with each other consistently in various UAP related efforts, unquote. In that one paragraph, Arrow identifies the most likely candidate for the real life counterpart to the fictional conspiracy found in Newman's The Flying Saucer. In a sense, this investigation of our investigation of the fake age of UFO disclosure has now come full circle, returning to the same cast of characters who we introduced in the earlier installments of our series. In the second installment of our series, for instance, much attention was given to ATIP, the unofficial incarnation of the DoD's UAP community of interest. And the second installment of the series also provided a look at Luis Elizondo, ATIP's most vocal and well-known participant. It is fair to say that Elizondo is the public face of the ATIP fraternity. He has appeared in scores of newspapers, magazines, documentaries, podcasts, radio shows, and television news programs. More often than not, he is portrayed in a positive light and enjoys softball questions from sympathetic journalists. While Elizondo has become a celebrity in the UFO community, there are problematic aspects of his background that many people may not be aware of. Many of those aspects were examined in our series, and specifically in the second installment. There is, however, much more that can be said about Elizondo. Elizondo's legal representation, for instance, opens a whole new can of worms. Currently, Elizondo is represented by Ivan Hanel, a Yale-educated attorney with the firm Cronus Law, PLLC. Hanel's biography states, quote, Ivan's practice areas include general civil litigation, corporate law, and family law. Ivan has worked predominantly on cases for plaintiffs seeking justice, including medical and legal malpractice, contract disputes, breaches of corporate duties, business partnership disputes, and employment issues, unquote. It appears that Hanel is now adding UAP/UFO issues to his practice areas, with Elizondo acting as his entry point into UAP/UFO circles. These circles actually possess less than benevolent goals, by the way. In an interview on the UAP Files podcast, Hanel referred to Elizondo as, quote, a friend and, quote, a very good human being, unquote. Hanel also described criticisms of Elizondo that appeared on the social media platform X as, quote, bullshit, and attacked a Wall Street Journal article that chronicled the contribution made by Pentagon disinformation to the UFO mythology. Hanel's dismissal of the arguments advanced in the Wall Street Journal article is especially suspicious. The attorney described the article's assertion as, quote, insubstantive and silly, unquote, concluding that the piece was a, quote, crappy article. In the June 6, 2025 article, journalists Joel Sheckman and Aruna Viswanatha charged that, quote, the truth behind some of the foundational myths about UFOs, unquote, is that, quote, the Pentagon itself sometimes fanned the flames in what amounted to the U.S. government targeting its own citizens with disinformation, unquote. Sheckman and Viswanatha further assert that, quote, the very nature of the Pentagon operations, an opaque bureaucracy that kept secret programs embedded within secret programs, cloaked in cover stories, created fertile ground for the myths to spread, unquote. The myth makers, according to Sheckman and Viswanatha, included military officers who spread false documents to create a smokescreen for real-life secret weapons programs. Sheckman and Viswanatha also claimed that officials that, quote, officials allowed UFO myths to take root in the interest of national security. For instance, to prevent the Soviet Union from detecting vulnerabilities in the systems protecting nuclear installations, unquote. Who was behind this disinformation campaign? Sheckman and Viswanatha failed to answer that question, writing, quote, investigators are still trying to determine whether the spread of information was the act of local commanders and officers or a more centralized institutional program, unquote. While the authors of the Wall Street Journal article were unable to identify the hidden hand responsible for the disinformation effort, the evidence indicated to them that the endeavor, quote, went back all the way to the 1950s, unquote. In addition to deceiving the general public, the disinformation effort sought to even manipulate some within military circles. The Wall Street Journal article revealed details regarding a fake reverse engineering program dubbed Yankee Blue. Yankee Blue involved induction briefings in which, quote, certain new commanders of the Air Force's most classified programs, unquote, received, quote, a piece of paper with a photo of what looked like a flying saucer, unquote. The stunned recipients were told that the craft was, quote, an anti-gravity maneuvering vehicle, unquote. What purpose did this deception serve? Sheckman and Viswanatha write, quote, investigators are still trying to determine why officers have had misled subordinates, whether as some type of loyalty test, a more or a more deliberate attempt to deceive, or something else, unquote. The Wall Street Journal authors seem unaware of the fact that UFO deception is characterized by function stacking, the employment of elements in an operation to achieve multiple ends. And I brought that up, function staff is stacking in my first presentation to the Rising Tide Foundation. While UFO disinformation, the UFO disinformation described by the Wall Street Journal article helped conceal secret weapon technology programs and advanced national security aims, it also played an indispensable role in a social engineering agenda. Aspects of that agenda have already been explored in several of the installments of our series. So that's what I have for the audience, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Fascinating. I mean, so many dimensions to this UFO conspiracy thing.
Yeah.
I was,
I'll just say one thing
oh yeah,
just quickly, Dave. Just Anna Polina Luna as well has been going on a rampage on the interview circuit. And she's completely enmeshed in this whole network that we were just hearing about. Really, really pushing hard on the idea that disclosure is imminent, blah, blah, blah. And people are eating this stuff up. So the timing of this presentation in your article series, which by the way is linked up in the chat box, for anybody who doesn't hasn't looked at your work yet, and you and your brother, all four parts are there available, but it's very, very timely that people get their mental act together and really inoculate themselves psychospiritually from the barrage of misinformation. So I just wanted to pitch in and say thank you. Again, my internet's very choppy, so I'm going to give back to Dave to post away.
yeah. So I mean, if people have questions, hand raising is always a good move. I guess a thought, or just thinking out loud here as I think about the UFO. Because yeah, I mean, one other question is, is some of the UFO stuff maybe gonna be used to just blame other countries, right? That like other countries have this technology and now we need to do this. Is it gonna be the world? You mentioned the world religion route. And so it seems like there's a lot of different things they could do with it. But of course, I think anything big requires there has to be chaos that breaks out in the world. And like now there's a lot of talk about the AI bubble bursting. So like we may be on the cusp of like a major actual financial blowout. Like that could actually it's look like it could happen at this point. So that's, I guess, where the alien stuff becomes even more appealing once people have really kind of like had a psychic break and there's like just total panic about, economic and social stability. Is that where, maybe if you could just say something about, the convergence of these different processes and what you think the timeline is, yeah, for alien.
This is what I think. This is not what I know. This is pure
Sure.
speculation. My crystal ball is just as fuzzy as everybody else's, but this is what I think. I think that initially, okay, there will be some kind of false flag event, and there will be casualties, and people will lose their lives. And initially, it will be blamed on another country, um,
Okay.
Russia, China. When those narratives prove to be deficient and fail to answer, that's when they'll turn to something beyond the earth. So I think it initially starts that way, and and there might be some initial aggressions or hostilities between the nations as they point the fingers at one another, but eventually it moves to something off planet and all. Because how else can you explain the seeding of the culture, of the public mind, of the collective conscious with all of these pictures of portraits of hostile aliens, these stories of hostile aliens, and they're gearing up to do it again here very soon, because there is a movie that is going to be coming out called The Age of Disclosure, and I'm going into it in my new article. If Philip and I are going to work on that, and who are the people that are introducing us to this age of disclosure? And I think that Farah, the director, has like 34 or 43, something like people testifying in it. Individuals like James Clapper, the guy behind the NSA scandal, who also it was mentioned in glowing terms by Luis Elizondo in his book Imminent. He refers to him as his mentor, and at one point he recounts this meeting with James Clapper in the green room before they go on some show, and Clapper's there shaking his hand, telling Lou Elizondo, "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you." James Clapper, John Brennan, Louis Elizondo, David Grush, all the same names that we've heard before are going to be on this movie. And they're going full bore with this film. I mean, like they've pulled out all the stops. They're going balls out with it. And it's even enjoyed some publicity on Fox News and all. There was
Yeah.
recently a Fox News article about it. So we're heading in that direction where it's going to be otherworldly in nature. There's just no other reason for all of this psychological the conditioning that's taking place in a very Tavistockian manner. There's how else can you explain it, and I think that it's to the ends that are suggested at the at in the concluding chapters of Newman's book. In the concluding chapters of Newman's book, there again there's this ecumenical meeting between all the Christian sects in Jerusalem, and there's a suggestion that it might go further and that other religions might be brought into the fold at a later time. So the ecumenism starts to move away from ecumenism to syncretism, to the blending of religions. Perhaps even inverted spirituality, even satanic religions, if you can really even regard that as a real religion, and people might be appalled at the idea that Satanism might be blended in there for good measure and all, but a lot of these guys have been close to, I mean, you look at Whitley Strieber, for instance. He talked about how he was working on a documentary on the Process Church of the Final Judgment, a satanic group, and all. There are pictures out there that you can find of Jacques Vallée standing with Anton LaVey, Anton Szandor LaVey, and all. I mean, the connections are there between these guys. John B. Alexander standing at a meeting of the oh, what's it called? The AFOI, the AFIO, the American the no, the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, standing there with Michael Aquino, one of the most notorious, Satanist of the last century, founder of the temple, high priest of the Temple of Set. So there is that connection there, and they probably will start blending. You know, on Anna Polina Luna, um, you know, she I know that she used to work with TPUSA, which has been in the news of late as a result of the Charlie Kirk assassination. But if you look at TPUSA, Turning Point UK, the UK branch of Turning Point, there is a guy, I believe his name is John Mannett, I believe, who heads up, or at least headed up Turning Point UK, who referred to himself as a Christian Scientologist. That's not a real category, dude. It's just not real. Christian Scientologist, you're talking about uh, the founder of the, Hubbard, who was a part of the OTO with Jack Parsons in California. And what was the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis? It was a group of followers of Crowley, of Aleister Crowley. This is that's not a that that's extremely suspicious. That's extremely suspicious. Anna Polina Luna is also pushing the whole Nephilim doctrine thing. She bragged on Joe Rogan's show about how she was sworn into office using a Coptic Orthodox Bible. Swear she was sworn in on that because why? Well, because the Book of Enoch appears in the Coptic Orthodox Bible. Oh no, not the Coptic. Sorry, scratch that. Not Coptic. The
Ethiopian.
Ethiopian. Yes,
Yeah.
Ethiopian. That's right. The Ethiopian one, because the book of Enoch appears in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible and all. So now you're getting back into Pember, into Darby, into the Plymouth Brethren, the extremely Gnostic group that had its origins over in England and all. So you're having all these weird. You're seeing all these weird and strange and fringe and satanic groups and inverted spirituality being introduced through this age of disclosure through individuals like Anna Polina Luna and Lou Elizondo. Even Lou Elizondo, by the way, I read his book Imminent. He talks about the Nephilim in it. He brings up the Nephilim doctrine in his book, and so that's one of the things that they're introducing through this world government, one world religion, and technocracy, 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 just pushed ad nauseum, in line with the character of Drummond from the 1950 book, The Flying Saucer by Bernard Newman, because Drummond starts the League of Scientists, and the League of Scientists becomes so powerful that no country can brook any kind of opposition to them, and they flex their muscle at the end of the book when there seems to be a dispute between two nations, and that these two nations have all this animosity between them, and it threatens fracture of the newly formed government. And the League of Scientists, threatened to pull their support, pull their help, pull their scientific know-how from those countries, and they're like, okay, we'll be good, and they're instantly, the hostilities abate, and they're instantly absorbed once again into that one world government structure.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, no, these are things to meditate on. I see Sue has a question, so go for it.
Okay. Hi, thanks, Paul. Oh, Dave, could you turn that off down? Thanks. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I wanted to go back to Edward Tiller, and you said that he was in the first leg of the Martian propaganda. And I just did a cursory look through Wikipedia. He came from Hungary. They were known as the Martians, those who immigrated in the 30s. He worked for Oppenheimer. He was part of the Berkeley conferences, and he was also connected to Georgia O'Keeffe. And I recently saw a fascinating slideshow on Georgia O'Keeffe, who was very connected to Oppenheimer. And she would go to Los Alamos and spend copious amounts of time with Oppenheimer. And they all would meet at a resort in the Presbyterian Church at Ghost Ranch. Um, and so, I mean, I have questions about the early nuclear program and the H-bomb. Teller was also one of the first proponents of climate change. So they were so highly involved from the very beginning with this kind of myth-making propaganda.
Oh yeah.
Just what you had any further comments on that?
Well, Teller was also very much instrumental in the introduction of Bob Lazar. He was supposedly the individual that got Bob Lazar his job at S4. And so, he was basically really, really instrumental in the whole creation of Area 51 uh, myths, the myths surrounding Area 51. And there's a whole can of worms there to open all by itself, all alone. Area 51 and the role that it's played in all this. But eh, we know that also it's suspected that Edward Teller was was behind the whole project Excalibur uh, fake fraud and all the this fictional program that was circulated among UFO people in the UFO community. William Cooper, the deceased conspiracy writer who was very, very active in the militia circles, he helped propagate this, and Paul Benowitz propagated this. It was leaked to him, and he honestly believed that it was true. But Excalibur is was in all likelihood really a reference to an Edward Teller initiated program of the same name. And what that program did was it was the projection of it it was trying to create a laser is what it was trying to do. It was a space-based laser program, and it ended up being in our third installment of the series. We go into it. We go into his attempt to create a viable laser and how it failed miserably, but he continued to lie to Reagan. He lied to the Reagan presidency, telling Reagan that they actually had a functional laser. But he took this fraud of a functional laser, and built another fraud on it, and all, where there was, see that the Excalibur project was being tested underground, and so he said, well, the tests that are going on underground aren't exactly tests. It's the aliens and the humans sparring off against one another underneath the earth. So he was able to create the idea that there aren't just hostile aliens out there, but here, now, here on Earth, actually fighting with us right now, and all, and just scared the hell out of people within the UFO community. And again, Paul Benowitz in particular, he couldn't stand it after a while. He finally had a breakdown and was institutionalized over the stuff and all. But that's another example of Teller contributing to the whole idea of hostile aliens, uh, in order to continue with the kind of militarist and statist trend that began with NSC 68, Paul Nitze's brainchild.
Great, thanks. And just one more question. So George O'Keeffe also had connections to Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons with sex magic, the occult. There's questions about her true gender, which comes through as they get older. She looks strikingly like Oppenheimer, actually. But just wondering if Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons had an early role to play in all of this.
Well, I
And they,
know I know that Crowley was influenced by Eliphas Levi, and Eliphas Levi was an earlier occultist, and he created the icon of the Baphomet. And if you look at the Baphomet, it's like this goat creature, this goat deity that has both male and female sex organs. So, there's probably like the origins of the whole transgender operation, if you will, the whole transgender op. They see the occultists seem to be very much behind that one, and also Tavistock was very much involved in it as well. So,
right. Okay. Thank you so much for your work.
well,
Incredible.
thank you.
Hey, I got a quick question. I'm going to occasionally chime in, but did you pick up in your research any connection between I heard the claim, I didn't verify this, but that the communist cell that Oppenheimer was a part of somehow had a financial connection or donation to the Agape Lodge #2 in California. Did you encounter that connection in your research so far?
Not so far. That doesn't mean that it isn't there. Oppenheimer is an interesting character that we go into in our book. Uh, Pavel Sudoplatov claims to have been able to use Oppenheimer to get nuclear secrets for the Soviet Union, not because Oppenheimer was a communist, not because he was an ideological communist or had any kind of pro-Soviet sympathies, but because Oppenheimer believed so much in a new world order. He very much believed, and Sudoplatov even uses that term in his book. Um, um, he believed so much in the new world order and so much in the world government that he thought that actually taking the risk and floating nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union would help bring a new world order about. See, he was in our book. We say that he was one of the nuclear fetishists that believed that if you internationalize the bomb, if you internationalize the nuclear weapons, then the world will be more receptive to accepting a world government because they'll see a world government as the only way of preventing an arms race. That's the only way that you prevent an arms race is having a global authority to manage the production and distribution of these weapons. Now, and um, Teller was more of he was part of another nuclear fetishist group, and again there was the fetishization of nuclear weapons, but he believed that they should solely be in the hands of America so that America could be transformed into an imperial power, and then America will unilaterally bring about the world peace and bring about world government. And so, I haven't looked into that. The quote about Shiva, I've now become Shiva the destroyer, really suspicious, really suspicious, and it's certainly a rabbit hole to go down and to look into, as far as the occult ponderings of the man, because they were evident, they're implied, but they're there.
Dave, any you're on mute, Dave.
I
You're
see
on
we
mute.
have Brett Walters. Take it away, Brett.
Hey, thanks for the presentation, Paul. I'd like to make an observation and also a forecast concerning the UAP agenda. First of all, it seems like the whole goal is of the oligarchy is to make an individual's thoughts and actions not their own, but not to their own benefit, but to the benefit of course, this class. And one of the ways they're doing that is through the mass dissemination of the idea that everything that is human was created by extraterrestrials. All the religions, all the structures, the pyramids, even to today's technologies, humans are not allowed to take any credit for that. So it's a very infantilizing ideology. And first, I'd like to suggest how might this how they might use this dialectically to further synthesize humans in the way they want us to be, and that is, if you recall back during when they wanted to implement 5G, I remember listening to hosts saying how that if China had 5G, but we didn't have 5G, it'd be basically the difference between us being the Stone Age and them being in the, I guess, way further along. And so we had to have 5G, otherwise China would have 5G. What I think they're going to do is they're going to say that that they're going to say that there's good aliens and bad aliens. The bad aliens created humans as slaves, and they also created these world religions to keep humans subjugated. But they're good aliens that want to see us thrive, be liberated, and maybe if they're successful in pulling off their false flag, their UFO false flag, then the next step will probably be to say that the bad aliens have sided with Russia and China, and they're helping the Russians and Chinese implement a harsh, regressive, conservative framework on those people. And we need to have the good aliens help us through the use of transhumanism so that we can compete with them and have the self-liberation that we stand for in the West. What's your thoughts on that?
In our book, we suggest that there are two different manifestations of the same narrative of the alien narrative. One generates a crisis of security, which would be the narrative in which the aliens are hostile. The other one is a crisis of diplomacy, and in that one, the aliens are either benign or benevolent, but the lack of a world government to representing humanity would lead to a breakdown in diplomacy, would lead to misunderstandings and the like. So, we think that both are being exploited. It's just that at this time, I don't know why, but at this time, it seems that that these covert political circles are intent on pushing the idea of aliens as first a national security threat and then a threat to international security. It seems to be the one that they're trying to press home the most right now. And like I said, I believe that it will be a false flag at some point. I believe that initially there'll be finger pointing among the nations, and the Russians will claim it as us. We'll be claiming it was the Russians. That will fail. That won't provide any adequate answers, and it will eventually be attributed to a hostile alien force of some sort. Now, I will say this. I think that I don't want to come off as one of these individuals that thinks we're dealing with some hyper competent group of conspirators here. They're not. I think if this happens, it fails miserably. It fails miserably. There's an initial awe. There's an initial kind of uh, uh, um, just acceptance of the idea, but then it's it's slowly or not so slowly, pulled apart by the fact that whatever's used, whatever kind of technology is deployed, look, the weapon system that's deployed, the propulsion systems that are deployed, that are used, they're going to have the trademarks of human ingenuity. They just are. They just are. And somebody's going to be able to point this out. Somebody's
Yeah,
going to
nuts
say,
and bolted aircraft.
yeah. And so it's going to fall apart really, really quick. It's not going to work as great as they would like. You know, we're living in the age of the failing narrative, where none of their narratives are taking anymore. None of their narratives are being believed by anybody. Look at what Bill Gates just did. His turnaround on climate change and all. Nobody, you know, he was trying to push it for the longest time, and now he's seen that it's just not working. And so, you know, he's kind of changing his tune on that. None of these are working anymore. You strained you strained credulity to the point of breaking. And so nobody's going to buy it, you know, at a certain point, and it'll just fall through. So that's my view. You know, something along the lines of what you're forecasting could also, you know, come true. And, you know, one group of aliens against another group of aliens, and each one represents a different nation. You know, with Star Trek, the funny thing there is that there are people that said that Gene Roddenberry wanted the Klingons to be the Soviet Union, that, you know, the Federation was the free West, that the Vulcans were the Taiwanese, the free Taiwanese, and the Romulans were the communist Chinese, you know. And so it looks like they did try to get us to associate certain countries with certain aliens in the fiction. So that you know kind of supports what you're saying. But I think that even if it's what you're saying, it fails miserably just the same at the end. It just if it fails, it's an it becomes an insult to people's intelligences, and they start looking for the culprits here on Earth, right here, in their own backyard. So
Well, I do hope
There's
you're right.
there's
It does seem that way. Like, remember that UAP phenomenon they had? I think it was over Minnesota last year, where all it was quadcopters.
yeah.
And Jones
Oh, wait.
and they tried to make an alien connection to that, and it was sort of ridiculous. And now we just have this comet that they say is interstellar come in, and it's just a rock. That's all you can see, and they're trying to make that an alien thing as well. Anyways, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, yeah. Phil and I are going into the New Jersey drone flap in the next article. We're busy. We're busy writing on that right now, and we'll share our thoughts on it. We think that it's just the latest manifestation on the part of the OSAP slash ATIP fraternity to create an aerial menace. And we do see the members of the OSAP ATIP fraternity in the past trying to create an alien menace. Christopher Kit Green, for instance, the CIA doctor, he has talked about how he knew people that were flying quote unquote helicopters disguised as UFOs back during the 90s and during the 80s and during the 70s even and all. So you know, this is just their latest attempt to create that aerial based menace, because you're gonna need to condition people to aerial based to an aerial based threat if you're going to then move them on to the idea that you know that there's an alien menace, a larger alien menace. So
Monty had shared an interesting little fact to keep in mind as well that I caught my eye. I'm just gonna read it. Monty says Ziklag, Ziklag. It's the grouping associated with the New Apostolic Reformation, which penetrated the TPUSA and is currently generating AI Charlie Kirk reincarnations for purposes of a new Templar movement. They, that's useful. That's a useful little observation. It takes on a variety of forms, but I was thinking about you actually see in churches all over the United States, there's AI reconstructions of Charlie Kirk that are just like people think that they're actually talking to the sort of disembodied digital spirit, the sort of etheric imprint almost of Charlie Kirk at these various church sermons now. It's really friggin' weird and creepy, but it's a
It is.
thing. Now to actually tie Ziklag and know that there's a new apostolic reformation movement behind that, I didn't know. So I'm gonna thank you, Monty, for pointing that out. I don't know if that's something you want to speak to quickly.
Gosh, that is a rabbit trail that I'm going down into that is exhausting because
Yeah.
the new apostolic reformation is part of the whole latter rain phenomenon. The latter rain claimed as one of its major movers and shakers, William Branham of the Branhamite movement. He was pushing the whole idea of serpent seed that would really gain traction in Aryan nation and white supremacist groupings that are known to just be filled with federal informants, with agent provocateurs from the government. William Branham also did a revival meeting in Indiana with Jim Jones. Jim Jones, in turn, had so many connections. It had more connections than a switchboard. To Harvey Milk, to there's evidence of CIA manipulation there. People in Brazil thought that he was that when he was in Brazil that he was working for the CIA, and and when the killings began in Guyana, on tape he's caught saying, "Get Dwyer out of here! Get Dwyer out of here!" Richard Dwyer worked at the embassy in Guyana and never answered the question when he was asked, "Are you do you work somehow for the Central Intelligence Agency? Are you somehow connected with the Central Intelligence Agency?" It's a really, really, really deep rabbit hole, and it's really important, and again, like the fingerprints of Scientology are all over it and all through John Mannett. And I would suggest there's been articles that are written out there that you can find about John Mannett, who's not TP USA, but he's TP UK. He takes credit for I believe having introduced George Farmer and Candace Owens to one another and all, and he was really close with Charlie Kirk, and again he referred to himself as a Christian Scientologist, and there just is no such thing. It just that is trying to put oil and water in the same bottle and all,
And that wasn't Christian Scientist, that was Christian Scientologist.
yes, Christian Scientologist. He calls
Ah,
himself Christian Scientologist and all,
ah.
which is an
Yeah, the other
oxy.
thing with TPE UK, I mean, the president of that, the founder is George Farmer, Candace Owens' husband, and Candace Owens has really been joining this messaging that Tucker Carlson has really been championing too, and what's her name, the former Fox News chick, what I forgot her name, Megan Kelly.
Megyn Kelly.
Um, yeah, the interdimensional demons that are the aliens scratching people, and Candace Owens is all over that. So they're all sort of in lockstep, also pushing heavier and heavier on that narrative in conjunction with the interdimensional alien thing that Jacques Vallée innovated and that Luna is pushing on too.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I do believe that there is a spiritual aspect to the deception and all, but in distinction from those individuals, okay, when when uh, the last time I appeared, I didn't want anybody to get the wrong impression, when I said, these 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 people are messing with forces that they don't understand, with intelligences that they don't dictate the terms to, and all that, and that it's going to end badly. I don't want people to think that what I'm saying is that, something akin to Ghostbusters is going to happen. You remember the scene in Ghostbusters when the containment unit is turned off and these malicious, malignant vapors start molesting and attacking the inhabitants of New York City? That's not what I'm saying at all. Um, something a phenomenon known as medium mystic psychosis is I think will be the end result and all. And medium mystic psychosis is just where you go ape shit from messing with Ouija boards, tarot cards, um, all the occult methodology that is among these objective scientists in the ufological circles. They're using all this stuff and all. There were security guards that came out and began talking about the weird nonsense that was going on at Skinwalker Ranch during Bigelow's time there, and he said that the Bigelow people they said that the Bigelow people were employing Ouija boards, in their study of UFOs. What place would that have at all in a scientific inquiry into these things? So, it's going to end badly. You just shouldn't mess with those things. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your mental health at all.
Dave, any more questions?
I mean, I feel it's such a broad subject. We could go on for a while because I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, it seems like these things do, there's a spiritual question at hand, and there's also just a question of there are conspiracies, right? But a lot of the UFO stuff is kind of like the QAnon, right? There's this kind of conspiracy in the background. There's this alternate war. And it's like, but in a sense, that's true, right? The problem is it's just like some conspiracies are true, but then there's a lot of super batshit ones. And I guess if to combat this on a higher level, I don't see an alternative to, there has to be a leveling up of the discernment so that people can actually parse through, like what's a real conspiracy? How does it work? And, what are these fake conspiracies, just like QAnon or, alien sort of galactic warfare, demons under the sea, coming up to bite folks. But then the same thing applies for the spiritual question, right? Like, there a lot of the alien stuff, as we always find, it's the same kind of satanic or like Gnostic idea, right? There are these agencies or spirits, and we're channeling different ones. Mystery cults, right? Mystery religions. I guess my question or thought is, there are mysteries, right? There is like a sort of spiritual reality. Human beings are not just flesh and blood. We have minds. We're made in the image of the creator. These things are, important to meditate on, but it's also so easy for people to get confused, right? Or led astray, acknowledging certain things that are true at a certain level, but then at a higher level, it goes awry. So yeah, how do you address that? Your take on what you think is important, some important anchors, key points.
I think that your sanity is kept and that you stay on target as long as you realize that a conspiracy is none of them are monolithic. They're non-monolithic in nature, and they are rife with factionalism. The people don't always get along with one another, and the people don't always agree on everything. And there's turf wars, and there's there's um, there's fighting. It isn't one pyramid that leads to a capstone where you got Donald Pleasant sitting there with a stroking a cat. You know, Ernst Stavros Blofeld. In America, for instance, there's several different power blocks. There's two major power blocks, as far as I'm concerned. There's those northeastern and east coast oligarchs who we would refer to as the Eastern liberal establishment, and then below the 37th parallel in the Sunbelt states, in states like Florida and Texas, a portion of California, Nevada, places like that, places in the more southern areas. There's what's been referred to as the Southern Rim, who are, not they're more entrepreneurial capitalists than the cartel capitalists in the East, and and they subscribe to a more conservative kind of form of globalism called frontierism, where they believe that the opening up of the American frontier and westward expansion is what guaranteed progress. Progress leads to salvation because they still believe in the Enlightenment principle of progress, and that progress is the equivalent of salvation. It's a salvific force and all. But what do you do now that that frontier is all tamed and all? We're about ready to lose our momentum. We're about ready to lose progress, and we're going to start falling backwards. Well, you press the frontier out beyond the North American continent. You have it go down into South and Central America. You have it go over into Africa. You have it go over into Western and even Eastern Europe. And so you have this expansionism, which, involves regime change operations, involves actual overt military actions like Iraq, like Afghanistan. And there you have it. You're right back to globalism. It's just that it takes on a more conservative kind of appearance. And it mobilizes the American right behind it. The American right follows these individuals, like the the John Birch Society. I will admit they have some good field researchers, but their Southern Rim, who was the one that was supporting them, who was their financial sugar daddy, Nelson Bunker Hunt. Nelson Bunker Hunt fought back and forth with Arm Hammer and other of those liberal Eastern establishment figures. He even, I think, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but he's been quoted as saying, "Whenever I go up east, they treat me like a farmhand." He didn't like those East Coast oligarchs, or the ones that came out of the northeastern Ivy League schools. So um, periodic there's a periodic healing of the rift where they actually collaborate, and then there are times where they pull apart and pull in different directions and compete with one another and all. The one thing that I will say, those two major power blocks do share one thing in common and all. One thing and all. The British race patriotism of John Ruskin and Cecil Rhodes. And how do I know this? Well, just read Patrick Buchanan, who is a big thinker in the Southern Rim circles. He says that America is threatened by the loss of its Anglo-Saxon heritage, and that its Anglo-Saxon heritage is why it's great, and that's supposedly the the root and source of all of Christian civilization here, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think that you have to start off there in that context. You got to start off in that context that we're not dealing with a monolithic conspiracy. Long way around Harvey's barn, where it's not a monolithic conspiracy. It's a constellation of different groups, different institutions, different people. Some very weak, some very strong, some in the middle, who somehow found a way to pull in opposite directions and yet pull in the same direction simultaneously and all. So
Yeah,
yeah,
one of the starkest or most recent examples, there's the Bannonite type. They're kind of trad, whatever you could butting heads with like the Thelians, the transhumanists, the tech people. Yet, Thiel was recruited by Opus Dei, which is like a hard right kind of synarchist Catholic organization that has all sorts of. So they're both traditionalists in a sense, but yet one is kind of super tech feudalism, and the other is more populist right. So yeah, there are so many of these factions,
yeah,
but they do have certain common dark age goals, I guess you could say, right? They both have their own brand of feudalism. Bannon has this kind of like medievalist Catholic kind of ideal, and Thiel has this kind of transhumanist Still, medieval, right? A medieval techno-feudalist idea. So yeah, they're still kind of part of the same ecosystem. They're just butting heads on certain structural or theoretical.
And yet
Absolutely.
they covertly or subtly end up actually supporting each other, even though they maintain a public image of being rivals. So Bannon maintains that public image of being critical of the Theolite transhumanist thing. Then, like, you showed me that interview, Dave, with Tim Dillon and Bannon, and the issue of chipping your kids and integrating with machines comes up in the conversation. And Bannon, while on the one hand, out of one side of his mouth, is critical of the transhumanist chipping your kids. On the other hand, he still maintains that if your kids don't get chipped, they're going to be left behind. So we have to accept the fact that it's got to happen, except we don't want it to. But, so he kind of like leads the mind to conclude that there's no other choice except maybe, I don't know. And Tim Dillon was having a lot of fun with that, kind of making fun of Bannon a little bit in a very classy way. But yeah, there's definitely a weird, but there's something common to all of these apparently different species, eh?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, up until 67, 68, around there, they were for the most part together. There was some cohesion there. And what happened in 67 and 68 was that there were disagreements over Vietnam. The military represented the Southern Rim saying, oh, the insurgents in South Vietnam, there isn't that many of them. We're fine. Whereas the CIA, representing the Eastern liberal establishment, said, no, there's a lot of insurgents, and this is going to be a problem. And what happened is that the Tet Offensive broke out, and the CIA proved to be more correct on their estimate, their intelligence estimates that yeah, there was a lot more North Korean insurgents in South Korea and all. But the Southern Rim held to their guns, saying, "Well, yeah, there was a lot more, but we won. We won. We didn't have any units defect. We had units that didn't have anybody left in them, but they didn't defect." And so and Westmoreland started asking for an elevation in troop levels over there, and all of a sudden everybody started to pull apart, and so the Cold War consensus was lost, and there was a time there where there was a big rift, and I personally think that that rift began to kind of heal, and they started to come back together during probably around 2016. Um, Trump is not a saint, but the rhetoric that he used was a populist rhetoric that resonated with people and started to pull people away from America's oligarchy. And both Southern Rim guys like the Koch brothers and people in the Eastern liberal establishment fold like the Clintons, Obama, and the like saw that as a problem. And so, and the neocons who had been kind of, allied with the Southern Rim, especially during the George W. Bush administration, they started to see Trump as a problem, and so there was a healing of that rift, and they kind of mobilized against the guy, and all. And well, now some Southern Rim guys still stand very much behind Trump. Trump's kind of a splintering force as far as the Southern Rim is concerned. Some of them say, no, we have to get this guy out of here. Others say, no, glom onto the movement, piggyback and let's bring in our agenda, under what appears to be an American first kind of platform and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot more nuanced than saying that everybody's friends, everybody follows one central command structure. It all then you got orders coming directly down from whatever group, from the Jews, the Nazis, the Vatican, It's a lot more nuanced than that. I experience this I'm a Catholic, and I see very much within the mystical body of Christ, within the body of believers, you know, of very good and noble faith and all. But when it comes to institutional Catholicism, when it comes to the Vatican and all, it's a damn train wreck, So, you have to acknowledge that there's nuances there, that there's that it's things are a little bit more complex than some of the wilder conspiracies would have you believe.
Here, here. I think that's not a bad note to leave it on. I think we covered a lot of ground there. It was good.
Well,
I
I
hope so.
feel I feel a little bit bad. I know Stephen, you were waiting. Are you okay with? No, you're good. Okay, cool. All
Oh,
right, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Dave, take it away, man. And thank you. I just want to say thank you so much, Paul. This is such an impressive class. You never cease to amaze me with your quality of rigor and research, and the fact that you've got such a good grounding in the history and dynamics of political intelligence psyops that allows you to go into this realm that usually people trip and fall and break their teeth trying to like dissect the subterfuge behind the illusions of the UFO narrative. So immensely important, high value. Thank you so much.
yeah. And any
Thank you.
so just a final plug, Paul. If where would you like people to, if they want to learn more about your stuff, what should they search?
Well, anybody wanting to read our articles right now, unfortunately, Conspiracy Archive is offline. I think somebody did a mirror site of it, and that's got a lot of the old work. I would recommend that people go to Canadian Patriot Review. We got a lot of our articles up there. Matt has been gracious enough to allow us a platform to share our stuff with there. And also Brett Carollo and Thomas over at Decoding Culture Foundation. They've also allowed us a platform. And so several of our articles appear there. And we appear in the Cultural Engineering Studies journal that they have. And I think issue 3 should be coming out here soon. And yeah, just go and visit those. Please, if you would, pick up the book. Invoking the Beyond. You should be able to buy it at Amazon.com. It's called Invoking the Beyond, and it's a large format book, but I think that it'd be worth anybody's time and effort.
That's great. Yeah, guys, get the book. That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
I got a copy. It's like 1,000. It's over 1,000 pages. It's hardcore. Everyone should own a copy of this thing. I've been plugging through it off and on, and it's just fantastic, fantastic resource that everyone should definitely have on their bookshelf if your bookshelf is big enough.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Good
gave
stuff.
to UFO just with that.
All right, so we'll be back again next week. Good to see everyone, and we'll see everyone soon. Have a safe trip back home, Matt.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.